More on the developing story around former President Jacob Zuma through the rest of the Pulse and through the evening. But for a moment, let's focus on what's probably the biggest long-term problem we face as a society. The fact so many people do not have jobs, do not have sustainable incomes, and particularly young people in your community who find it impossible to find any kind of work. But while around 700,000 people finish matric every year, most parties are not promising nearly enough jobs to accommodate people looking for them. And Bernstein is the Executive Director at the Centre for Development Enterprise. And good afternoon to you, and thank you for your time. You're very critical of the parties and their manifestos, and particularly the ANC. Why do you believe they're not being ambitious enough?
Well, good afternoon, Stephen. I was surprised when I read the ANC election manifesto. This is the ruling party, considerable experience, and at first you think, good, they've made employment and creating jobs their #1 priority. But they used very strange language. So they said they're going to create around 3.5 million work opportunities. Language matters. What they mean by that is not a full-time job or somebody working in a spaza shop for 5 years. What they mean is generally a temporary job funded by the public sector, some kind of public works job, okay? Now that is a very different thing from a job that you get in the private sector. And I was stunned at how little they were offering the country, that their promise to the country is the equivalent of some 250 to 300,000 jobs over 5 years. I think that's it's unbelievable, actually.
It's a big contrast. If I remember President Cyril Ramaphosa's inauguration in 2019, he was talking about 2 million jobs back then over a longer period of time. Do you think politicians just don't understand how big the problem is?
I think they do. I think the ruling party understands how big this problem is, and it has deep consequences for the country. But I get the feeling they either don't know how to create jobs in a functioning economy, or they've given up. This is too hard. So there is a section on economic growth and the obstacles to economic growth in this manifesto. But it's very business as usual. There's no discussion that we are in a crisis. The country has hardly grown its economy above 1.5% in 15 years. And we have probably the highest, let me put it this way, we have probably the smallest proportion of our workforce active in jobs of any country in the world. I think that requires a sense of urgency, a sense of mission, and a real sense of ambition that the next government, if the ANC is the next government after the election, they are really going to work very hard at this to change South Africa's economic trajectory. But that's not the impression you get or the words you get from this manifesto. And it's deeply, deeply concerning. So I wanted to point this out to readers of the paper where I wrote this op-ed, but to to citizens. Citizens should be aware of the measly, paltry offer that the ruling party is making to the electorate.
Is it also, I mean, there are various ways of looking at this. Is it also the ultimate expression of how South Africa, like many other societies, but ours in particular, is a nation of insiders and outsiders? And if you're an outsider, you don't have a job or the prospect of one, or a formal job at least. If you're an insider, well, that doesn't really matter to you, and crucially, to your family. If you've got a job, you can probably get a job for your children.
Stephen, that used to be the case. We could say, look, they're insiders and they get a job, and as you say, their children or their sort of homeboy, as it used to be called, from their rural area might get a job through that connection. And then there was this millions and millions of people who were excluded from getting, often young people who've never had a job, and they were excluded from getting into the labor market. what's happening now, which is truly terrifying, is that the number of the insiders are not growing. So we're getting young people coming into the labor force every year, and we're just not able to deliver jobs. The economy is not functioning well enough. We deliver something like one job for every 4 people entering the labor market every year. This is really, so that's partly why our unemployment numbers are growing so high. And so things have got worse. I think that's the point. There are insiders and outsiders. The numbers of outsiders are growing. And this is very worrying indeed.
What measures...
So
Go on.
Sorry. Well, no, in about 2008, the global norm is that about 60% of your workforce should be employed. And South Africa in 2008 was at about 45, 46% of our workforce. Today, we're at 40% of our workforce. So we are way off the global norm for around 60%. And that is about 8 million people.
If the politicians, one of the reasons that they're not being more ambitious is that they don't know what the solution would be, are there solutions? And obviously any solutions would take a long time. This would not be something you do in one electoral term of 5 years.
Absolutely. We have to get growth going. That's the first thing. And we need a sense of real urgency, determination, and commitment, and a vision from our political leaders and communication to everybody that we have to do everything possible to get the growth engine going again. That's the most important thing. There are other things you can do. We've got to look at how we make the growth that we get more job intensive, and we can talk about the detail of that. And we've got to just be much more attractive to foreign investors and a more kind of competitive economy. So we have to restore confidence that South Africa is committed to getting growth going, and that is priority number one, and the jobs that will flow from that. Now, I'm not opposed to, in the circumstances we're in with so many millions and millions of people unemployed, we support public works programs. But we need to think of these as, in a sense, a stopgap, which might be for 10 years, but it's a stopgap. It's not something we're just growing and growing. Firstly, we can't afford it. Our fiscal situation doesn't allow us to do that. And secondly, very many of these jobs are just make-work jobs. They're not jobs that get you a step up in the ladder of employment. So we need to be very clear where we are. The first priority, what should be the centerpiece of the ANC's election manifesto, is we have to get growth. And that means we can't continue doing what we've been doing for the last 15 years. We've got to fix the state. We've got to fix infrastructure, and we've got a plan on how to do that. And I don't think that's being communicated in this manifesto at all.
And Bernstein, thank you very much indeed from the Centre for Development Enterprise. Really do appreciate the time today. Well, to other news now. The Electricity Minister, Newzroom Afrika, says efforts to mitigate